I have this thing, Instagram's for like ass, where Twitter is like you have to get noticed for your level of thinking.
This is going to be a good podcast. I can already tell.
I used to really care about what other people thought. And the reality is that reality is malleable. So fuck it, like who cares?
I think there are some people that could see you, 44, incredibly successful business owner. There's probably almost this air of like, how relatable is this guy? Was he always perfect?
If I didn't do what I did back in my 20s, I would probably be out on the street because I was doing some drugs in a very addictive manner back then. And then something happened in my life, which I consider to be the worst and also the best thing that happened. We get this call from my dad. Something's not right with your mom. They have to operate on her because there's something happening with her stomach. While they're operating on her, they end up leaving an infection in her. And then mom passes away. She was like the most important person in my life. I cried every single day of my life, every single day. And what I learned from that was that emotion is energy. And I'm gonna use this to fuel my life. And then from there, I never looked back. My whole thing is like the more that you actually push down your emotions, the more they're gonna come back, just stronger. So we have to understand how to manage these emotions, how to sit with them, and how to deal with them, because this is what keeps your blade sharp. I'm actually doing this thing with my dad. He's coming over to British Columbia, and I'm gonna be doing the podcast with him. And I have this like list of questions, and it's like, how often do we not ask our parents some things that we would even ask our friends just to get to know them a little bit. It's like, how did you and your mom meet? And how's your relationship to your parents? And so I'm gonna do that podcast with my dad. I think it's gonna be like one of the most like profound things that we ever do together.
I bet you for yourself, but I know my relationship with my grandparents is very special, and they both passed away before I was obviously like aware enough to ask them the questions that I wish I could have asked them. So I feel like for your kids too, it's just like these nuggets that they'll be able to, like the stories that I lived through like what my mom tells me about my grandfather and my grandmother. I'm like, there's something amazing about just being able to take a little bit of their life and being able to like apply that. The intergenerational connection is just, I think, so valuable.
Yeah, it's like, do you know anything about your grandparents? Or it's not, do you know anything about your grandparents? My grandparents died before I even like remember anything. And then I wish there was something that connected me to them. And I think a lot of times we kind of like miss that understanding of like where we came from. Yeah. A lot. And having something like this where we have like the technology to be able to do something like that, it's incredible. Yeah. So why not like take advantage of it,
It's a time capsule in a lot of ways.
Yes.
So I gotta turn this off.
Yeah, that's going to be amazing, especially for your kids too, because you hear, like us growing up, because I still have 3 of my grandparents left, but, I hear these stories about my great-grandparents, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what my great-grandpa that immigrated from Ireland was like, right? And now for like, your grandkids and your they're going to actually be able to see that, which I think is so cool.
I think so too. I think so. It's not just for me, it's for like the rest of the family.
Yeah.
And for them to be able to, it also like brings this like sense of like humbleness too. It's like you gotta like especially for kids like who grow up, and I think that you're gonna create probably a better life for your kids than you grew up in, most likely from a consumerism standpoint, from like a financial standpoint. But there has to be some form of like being able to like humble yourself, knowing where you came from, knowing where your roots are from, knowing like how your parents were raised, and knowing how things like changed over the course of generations. It's like, especially for me, it's like I'm immigrant, and growing up was fucking hard, as opposed to like how kids are growing up right now. Like beatings were like a regular thing. Like they were kind of like, it was just like, you just do that, it was accepted, which is fine, right? And now it's just like you have to understand, it's like, where did my freaking parents come from? What did they have to go through? Because probably what they had to go through is like way worse than whatever I had to experience, like going through them.
Totally.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be really fun to do that. Yeah.
Is your family from Korea?
No, we are Chinese-born Filipino. So
Chinese-born Filipino.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure we're like 99% Chinese, but because of like all the revolutionary stuff that was happening in, or the kind of communist regime that was happening in China, what was happening is that my dad's parents were like, we gotta get the F out of here. So you have a lot of Chinese who live in Malaysia, who live in Philippines, who live in all sorts of different places, and they decided to immigrate to the Philippines. And then I think my dad and found my mom in the Philippines, and I think she was also like Chinese as well, who did sort of like the same thing. Unfortunately, like, you know, mom's not there anymore, so I can't ask her these questions.
Yeah.
But I'll ask my dad when we do that podcast.
When we do the pod.
Yeah, for sure.
That'll be sweet.
It's gonna be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I feel like we've known you for so much longer. I feel like we say this a lot with people we meet on Twitter. It's like you kind of have those shared values. So when you meet up in person, it almost feels like you already know them too, which is very cool.
Yeah. Well, I do think that we would not be following each other if we did not share like similar values to each other.
Definitely.
Which is something to be said about like social media in general. And also like with social media, there is like this whole concept of just seeing so much of like one person's life, and also like the things that they stand for and the things that they believe in. And then that actually makes you know someone a lot better, as opposed to like even talking to them in person, because a lot of what people will actually put on social media is some of what like you wouldn't even say in real life to someone random that you just met. And yeah, man, it's an incredible thing like with this social media thing, because a lot of people kind of like deem it as kind of like this negative thing, which it can be, but it also like brings you into the kind of like into the sphere of influence of like guys like you in terms of the information that you're putting out. I wouldn't have known about blue light blockers if I wasn't on social media in the first place. There's so many things and so many people that I've met off of social media that I've kind of created this like second sphere of influence outside of the people that I know in like my local space, so to speak. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We should we get into it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah.
do it.
I
We
feel
always
like
just-
we could probably put some of that in the episode.
I thought we were getting into it.
Yeah, I
already.
know.
Yeah.
I was like, I just want to make sure we're all on the same
I was
page.
like, podcast mode, like,
So we'll edit that out. And
Okay.
Just
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
rolling. But
cool.
yeah, I love what you were saying about just like the virtual space gets so much negativity,
Yes.
but I can't think of like there are certain things that I look back on that actually changed my life because I came into contact with them through the internet and people. It's like Twitter. I think we're all like Twitter native, so to speak.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
so like getting into contact with some of these ideas that have either changed my outlook on health or finances, like the whole Bitcoin community is that totally changed my perspective on understanding what money is, faith, like all these ideas that are not typically talked about a bunch in person. It's just like this amazing town square where you can go and share thoughts and ideas. And I love Twitter for the fact that, or X, that you just can resonate with someone's thoughts and, you know, there's no strings attached. It's more so just like idea sharing, which, you know, I think that's kind of how all three of us got connected.
Yeah. There's like, the way I feel is like there's this world that's within social media. And then if you try to talk about the stuff that you see in this world of social media to people who aren't necessarily privy to that world, they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know, even things like cryptocurrency or things with health. I feel like things happen on social media probably like 2 to 3 years before they become mainstream, before kind of like other people take it who aren't necessarily privy to that information. And then also with social media, it's like we're in the weeds as well. I would say it's like we are watching guys like Dr. Jack Cruz. One of them for me is like Grim Hood, who talks about like blue light. And when we see these guys are kind of like niche a little bit. And when you try to talk about this stuff with people who aren't necessarily privy to the space, it's an entirely completely different world. And I'm not going to say that they're like necessarily indoctrinated towards, you know, something specific, but, you know, with social media, you are kind of like you have this sphere of influence where you're able to not only get like information from different people, but also information from different types of places where this person disagrees with that person. And then it actually sparks debates between them as well. Now, the dangers with social media is the fact that just like anything with like food, with anything, there can be like too much of it, especially with like, you know, we're on Twitter where sometimes like the most negative stuff gets boosted.
Totally.
So that's like the danger. That's the stuff that if you're on social media enough, you have to like keep yourself protected against it. And for someone who isn't necessarily privy to that stuff, what's going to happen is that they're going to get sucked into those like pendulums of thought and be like, oh, social media is like so negative, when you really have to like know the right places to look in the first place.
Yeah.
It's a good point. It's really a double-edged sword like anything else. So you can use it incredibly well, or you can use it to be addictive, suck away a lot of your time, etc. But I really do think it's this amazing tool that really does give you infinite leverage. Like if I even think about you, right, prior to getting on Twitter, you own a really big gym in Canada, right?
Yeah.
So the max you're probably going to help people transform themselves is a few thousand, if that, versus now it's like 660,000 people follow you, and you're working with entrepreneurs and clients from literally all over the world that would have never previously been able to get exposed to you and your content, your philosophy. And that's so motivating, right? Where you're no longer restricted to just Canada. Anyone across the world can say, hey, I really like Dan's philosophy. I want to work with him so he can help me transform my body, my mind, the way that I show up as an entrepreneur, as a parent. And that's really motivating. What the internet does is it pulls away that like geographic resistance that we had before.
Yeah, 100%. That's the reason why I started on social media in the first place. Because I owned my gym for 10 years or 11 years before I sold it. And then during that time, I'm just like, I had this choice. I was like, I can either like grow this like one little gym, or do what most people are doing, which is like franchise it, license it, like grow all these like different locations. And I was just like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't even like this business that much. And then I was like, what's one way in which I can expand my reach without necessarily having to expand the places where I have to be? And then that was social media. And that was Twitter specifically. And it's been a blessing this whole time. Now my thoughts and my ideas, for better or worse, get out to like millions of people, to hundreds of thousands of people on the newsletter. And I really think I'm doing a good job. Although, I'm getting like most people just coming back to me. It's like, oh, this changed my life. That changed my life. And then they're not even a part of any of my programs. They're just getting like free information. So at least for me, like when I first started in fitness, actually before I started in fitness, I was working this dead-end job, and I freaking hated it. It was like this corporate job. And it was all about just like trying to get people to buy these high interest loans, and trying to get people on these like 30% loans and all this kind of stuff. And I felt like dirty every single time that I would be coming home from this particular job. So I was like, all right, screw this. I'm not going to do this anymore. I hate this. What's the one thing I want to do? I just want to like help as many people as humanly possible. And that started off with me being a one-on-one personal trainer, to eventually starting a one-on-one personal training business, to eventually owning a gym, to eventually like kind of like doing what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
We've only really known each other for 30 minutes in person, but I get this sense that you have this deep connection with like the alignment and with like who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. Like if you were to stray outside of that, you would have some serious problems. I'm curious, like, where does that integrity come from?
I feel that when you optimize for things like money and reach, and certain things that you may or may not necessarily have control over, and things that could be just like surface level types of achievements, I feel like even if you achieve it, it becomes like empty. And I've done that a number of times in my life, where it's just like you reach this like pinnacle and you're like, is that it? As opposed to trying to optimize for making myself proud, if that makes any sense.
Definitely.
So I'll use an example. I just got started on YouTube. I was telling you guys a little bit about getting started on YouTube. It's a little bit of like a slog. And before I was like optimizing for like, okay, so how many subscribers can I get? Like how many views can I get on this thing? And even though I would get the views, I'd be like, all right, what's next? What's next? But now it's just like the way I optimize for YouTube videos is like, am I proud of like what I created? Did I come at this video in a way which I think is like really cool and novel? And then the more that I optimize for that, I think the results just kind of come as a result of that. And the more that I optimize for what's like in my heart rather than like what my mind wants, it's a lot better. And I feel like the more that I can do that, the better my life will be, and the more that I'm kind of in flow with things. And yeah, it's like more optimizing for things that would fulfill me rather than kind of like, let's just say like money or other things that are kind of like a byproduct of the value that you're bringing to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good philosophy. not just about content creation, but also in terms of the way that you should be approaching your life, where I think I've gotten to a point now too, in a similar way, and Harry as well, where like, if we're not inspired to create a piece of unique content, I would err on the side of just not posting at all. And I remember when we first got on Twitter, when we had, 100, 200 followers, and we had big dreams of just wanting to put out really good information and be able to grow the brand. You're taking these different cohort classes and everyone has like their recommendations of how you should be creating content. Hey, don't make the threads too long, use this type of image. And what we were noticing is like those things did help to an extent, but all of our best pieces of content were like the most authentic things to us. Like some of the best pieces of content we put out were like the longest types of tweets, the longest types of threads. It was just true to us, and our audience found that to be valuable, and that's ultimately how we grew. And I find that very similar with your YouTube, where you're like, you're only putting up videos that are authentic to you. You're not like just optimizing for the thumbnail or the perfect header or the content that you think the audience wants. You're just posting content that's authentic to you and what you feel compelled to post about.
Mind you, we're still trying to optimize.
Of course, yeah. A little bit of optimization.
Still trying to optimize for those things. But I do think there's something to be said about, you can feel the energy of the person who's creating the thing that you're consuming, right? Like even when I started on Twitter, it's like you can almost like hear their voice through the thing that they tweet. And that's kind of like the thing with anything that you create. You can feel the energy of the person that is creating the thing. And a lot of times people will be like, okay, well, that's like unscientific or like whatever it is. But no, you can feel like when someone's really jazzed about something and when someone's not jazzed about something. I have a friend who has this like incredible following, and he feels like he's boxed in to like talk about the thing that got him this incredible following. The funny thing is that it's not necessarily, nothing is like growing on that end for him, but also because, at least from my perspective, I think it's because he's not speaking from an authentic place of the stuff that he feels like he wants to be talking about. And I feel like that's the thing about artistry as well. And I don't want to call myself, I do think that like what we kind of like do is a little bit of artistry. I mean, there is a bit of art to like what we do, but also that would mean that we are also like artists. And with artists, it's like, if you look at like, let's just say like a singer, you would see that their music evolves over the course of time, right? They talk about different things. And if they're not, it means that they're kind of like playing to the crowd the entire time. And I think that's what we have to do with our own kind of things that we create. It's like, don't cater to the crowd, cater to kind of like what you feel is right. You could still cater to the crowd maybe like on a ratio basis, maybe like 30 to 40%, but still create things that you feel are right for you. And then the more that you do that, the more you evolve your audience, and the more that your audience evolves with you, or they don't. But at least you're creating from a place where you actually feel proud of the things that you're putting out. Yeah.
It's a really good point. And you made me think of this clip that I saw Theo Von, the comedian. He put this piece out, or it was just a clip from his podcast, but he was talking about how, I guess his podcast has gotten to the point where there are so many people involved where he doesn't feel like he has as much of the creative touch on just like directionally where things are going. And he's like, yeah, sometimes it just feels like, I'm just like waking up and just doing stuff and I don't even know why I'm doing it. I was like, I never want to get to that point, so long as we're working on stuff and trying to just create things, I feel like having your hands dirty and having your hands involved with the creation process is so important. Like you can't step away from that as the person whose voice and creative inspiration is what's driving whatever you are that you're building, whether it's a podcast or social platform.
Yeah, it reminds. Well, I do like business coaching on the side with just like one or two people, and one of my clients, which is like pretty much like one of my only clients. He phased himself out of coaching, right? So he's a fitness coach. He phased himself out of all coaching. And I was like, that's not the way to do it. Like you need at least like a few people under your roster, because this is like what keeps your blade sharp. This is also like what creates content. This is also like what gives you ideas. But you can't like relegate everything and be like, okay, well, I just need to outsource everything. There has to be like, especially if you're a practitioner, there has to be some form of you inside of that process, and you can't do that without being in that process. And I do believe there is something to be said about doing things that don't necessarily scale, which end up scaling in the first place.
Yes.
So I do this thing where I was doing this thing before kind of like I got sidelined by sickness, but I was literally sending like voice notes, 5 voice notes out to 5 of my followers on Twitter or Instagram, and then it had nothing to do with like me wanting to like do business or anything like that. I literally just said, "Hey, what's up? Thanks for commenting on my stuff. Really appreciate it. And I see what you're doing on Twitter. Just keep it going. Really, really respect what you're doing. End. That's it." And then the more that I do that, for some reason, I feel really good about it. But also, it's like I'm acknowledging the people that are also like following me and giving me their energy as well. And I do believe that there is some things that you can do that don't necessarily scale, which still add to kind of like this energy that you're putting out into the world. Yeah.
Yeah, the voice notes are such an amazing touch, or the video messages too.
Yes.
Even with our customer service tickets for Noble, Harry and I will send Loom videos for like a basic customer service ticket to someone, and the average CPG owner that's scaled the business would be like, "You can't do that. That's not scalable." And it's like every time someone is sending in a request, it's a great opportunity to show them who the face of the brand is and make them feel really good when they associate with Noble. And so many times you'll send those messages where a customer is complaining about something, and then they see the founder's face. I'm speaking like from a place of authenticity. They love it. And then a lot of times they'll end up purchasing on subscription too. But the average like founder playbook would be like, "Oh, you can't do that. That doesn't scale." And to your point, I think it is so important to schedule some of those things in and just shoot from the hip.
Yeah, 100%. And it keeps you close to the people who are consuming your stuff. So there happens to be like this separation, kind of like the bigger that you get, the more you get separated from your customers or your audience. And you want to do things that kind of like keep you close and keep your ear to the ground, so to speak. And I think that's just brilliant, like what you're doing, because number one, it's like you're creating a true fan. You do that like 1,000 times over. That's 1,000 true fans right there. And how long is that going to take? It's going to take like what, 5 minutes of your time? You do that like 2 to 3 times, maybe like 4 times a day. And then guess what? Like over the course of time, you're building out like more than 1,000 fans over the course of like a year, if not more than that. So I look at it as like, yes, do things that don't scale. Who cares about whatever the payoff is? And more so like do what you think is like right inside, right? Do what you think is right. Do what you think is cool. And then the more that you do that, the more that it doesn't matter like what the payoff is. It's just like you're doing something that you feel is cool, that's inherent to you. Yeah.
Are there people that you've drawn creative inspiration from?
Everyone. That's for sure. You guys. Pretty much like everyone that I follow on Twitter. I see the way that they do things, and what strikes out to me is just their authenticity of like what they do. So I take inspiration from everyone. So especially with like this YouTube stuff that I'm getting into at this very moment, I'm looking at the way that other people are doing videos, and I'm like, that's cool. I really like that. Or I'll look at kind of different formats. I'll look at different titles, different thumbnails, and different ways in which they present the thing that they're trying to talk about. And for me, it's like I'll use like one of them is a friend and a client. His name is Mark Manson. I think Mark is like one of the most creative guys that I've ever met, and he's also comes from like a super authentic place. It doesn't come from like a bullshit place. It actually comes from a place that's inherent in him. He's done the work. He's done the research. And yeah, I look at someone like him and I'm like, okay, well, I would like to emulate what Mark does and eventually like make it mine. So yeah, there's a number of people out there. If there's anyone that is out there, when people ask me, it's like, who do you admire and get and take inspiration from? I would be like, number one is like probably like Mark Manson for the reasons that we talked about. The other one's James Clear, because basically James Clear like made a book and just said, screw it, like I'm not gonna make another one. And it kind of like exited the whole. He didn't exit the sphere, but he kind of like did it on his terms, which I really respect. One of them is also he's a friend and he's also a mentor. His name's Dan Martell, and I just love like Dan's drive and his ability to understand that you can have it all, and his work ethic that he puts behind everything, and also like his mindset and his mentality that he takes towards life. Is there anyone? Well, I'd say like Huberman is another one. For me, I remember like Huberman, and he gets like so much flack on social media.
So much.
And that's unfortunately like the cost of doing business, especially when you get that big.
Totally.
But the way in which he like is able to still post through everything, and also the way in which he is able to respond in a very respectful way to people that seemingly just disrespect him.
Mm-hmm.
I admire that so much, because sometimes I can't help myself when
Yes.
when you get some of that stuff. So the way in which he kind of like navigates social media, I think is like incredible, and also like the contributions that he's made to the world as well, in terms of like the information that he puts out. Yeah, I would say those guys probably are the top of mind when I think about it. Yeah.
I've seen Naval mention you a few times on Twitter too, which is like, talk about the leverage of the internet. Like you saying, you know, Mark Manson, who's so impactful, being a friend and client, people like Naval, who he's impacted so many of men start businesses and think about the world the right way. Just the fact that those people are in your sphere from getting on Twitter. I think Twitter is the best. Here, and I say this, I think it's the best just like networking app that's ever existed. And it's so interesting because people are probably like, oh, Dan, so you have 660,000 followers on Twitter. Why not start with Instagram? Why not start with YouTube? That's what everyone else does. And we're similar to you, where we started on Twitter, and that's made all the difference for us as well. So I'd be curious, like, what was it about Twitter that made you gravitate towards it when you were like, hey, I'm going from gym owner to getting in this online thing?
So I have this thing. It was like Instagram's for like ass and body, where Twitter is like you have to get noticed for your level of thinking and the ideas that you put out there. And it doesn't stop anyone from like putting their bodies out and being like, you know, promoting themselves that way. But really, it's like you are judged based on the quality of your thought. So when I first started on social media, I was thinking of like the highest leverage thing that I would want to do is get judged based on my idea, or not necessarily get judged based on my ideas, but at least put out myself through the quality of my ideas and thoughts rather than the quality of like what my body looks like. Personally, for me, it's like I really do think that, you know, I'm not like the fittest guy in the world, and, you know, I'm not like the most like ripped or biggest guy in the world, but that doesn't fucking matter to me. It's really about like, okay, well, do people kind of like connect with the thoughts that I'm putting out there? And if they do, awesome. And I always say this is like, if you can actually have people connect with your thoughts and your ideas, that's transferable to every single platform that's out there.
Definitely.
As opposed to like if you're on Instagram and you're putting out, you know, half naked pics, and that's the reason why you're getting like all these followers and everything. You try to do that on like Twitter, I mean, you're probably going to get like flamed, especially if you don't have the requisite thought that comes along with that, like the actual ideas and the philosophies behind it. So I do say that Twitter was probably at that time like the hardest nut to crack in that sense. And that's the reason why I started on it, because that's what I wanted to get judged. If I were to be judged, I would be judged based on the quality of my writing, my thoughts and ideas. And then I do think that now it's turned into this this kind of like split testing ground a little bit. It's like I put my thoughts out there, and these thoughts, it depends on like what people grab onto. They can be automatically transferred to Instagram, to LinkedIn, to even like YouTube. And it's more so based on kind of like what I can test on Twitter, which is going to be more so kind of like connected on the mainstream.
Yeah.
Yeah. The written language is so hard to, I mean, not hard to convey, but I think the level of mastery around words and using words to actually convey creativity, and you can repackage messages that are so simple. Like the amount of times that we've probably tweeted about meat in different ways that have gotten traction in very simple ways. Like there's one tweet that I put out. It was like, God food, good food. And it like, I forget the rest of it, but it was like very simple, but just like thought about in a way that made sense and was impactful, and it did well. And so I think to your point, it's like you can get a lot of these like bigger ideas just through having clear thinking and clear writing on Twitter.
Yeah. Something that Twitter's taught me a lot is that simplicity wins in the end. Simplicity of thought. That doesn't mean to like dumb down your ideas, but it does mean to write in a way that is able to be understood by a 6-year-old, you know?
Definitely.
Like,
Yes.
yeah. And it's funny, like I was having a conversation with Zuby and Ed Lattimore, and it's true. It's like the quality of like reading comprehension has kind of gone down a little bit in recent years. So we have to kind of like convey even like the most complex things that we can think about in ways that a lot of people can attach their kind of like perceptions to. And that's what I try to do on Twitter as much as possible. I try to stay away from like, you know, super big words or super big vocabulary, even though I use it sometimes. But it's like, how can we take these complex ideas and really just like present them as like these simple thoughts? And then the more that you can do that, the more that you make like, say, something like health and fitness accessible for everybody, as opposed to someone who's kind of like quoting all these studies, using all these big words that no one understands. And what they're doing is they're only talking to people who are like super addicted to that stuff, but not necessarily like the general population. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point, Dan. And I think Twitter before, when there was just the character limit, was a great example of that. Because I remember like going to the drawing board, writing a draft of something where I'm like, this is really good, but it's like 50 characters over. All right, what kind of fluff can I pull out of here? How do I get this, trim it down?
Yes.
And then you pull out some words, you rephrase some sentences, and you're like, oh, this is actually the purest, most direct thing of what I'm thinking. And it's a great tool to actually make you become a better writer. And you're interesting because we were scrolling through your YouTube, and there's just something about video and speaking that just your authenticity is able to come through even more. Where what I thought about you is I was like, he's a fitness guy who's very passionate about helping entrepreneurs level up. And then when I was watching through some of your videos, I'm like, I actually changed that a little bit. I'm like, I think he's just passionate about helping men become stronger versions of themselves. And there was a video you posted about like porn addiction and like your journey through that, which was like super relatable to some of the things that I'd experienced too. And it like, that's what video does, like gives you the ability to be super authentic, speak from the heart, right into a camera. And I'm excited to see how that grows for you, because I think there's very few people that can speak eloquently and then also write eloquently. And if you can package those things together, that's an amazing combination.
Well, thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. I really do. Yeah, the concept of like going from like writing to YouTube has been very interesting. But also it's like it's brought me back to, okay, so you know, even things like giving up porn, giving up alcohol, these are things that have been very like personal to me. So it's easier to talk from an experience that I have had, and also the experiences that I've had also with like other clients as well. And I do think that my life as like a practitioner, being in this fitness industry for like 20 plus years, seeing thousands and thousands of clients, all of that has like culminated in kind of like, again, like taking these complex ideas and trying to understand like, who is it that I'm actually talking to. I'm actually talking to two people. I'm talking to me probably 20 years in the past, and I'm also talking to the person who's like a complete beginner, a person who doesn't necessarily like work out, and a person who's kind of like just getting started, a person who has all these vices, all these things that are distracting them from the full potential that they have. It's funny that you say like the male thing is like, my audience is like 84% male, and I do speak to females still, but at the same time, if I am being authentic, it's like I am talking to like who I was like 20 years ago, and I think that's where the authenticity comes from, and also it's easier to kind of like allow yourself to be vulnerable in that sense if it is coming from a personal place, and for me, it's like anytime that you're putting any content out into the sphere and into like the social media sphere, there is like a piece of you that you're bleeding out there into the world. So if you're okay with that, if I'm okay with that, then that's cool. And it's also understanding that I used to really like care about like what other people thought. And I had this really like, I guess you'd say this knack of just wanting people to like me. And the reality is that the more I do that, the more I actually push myself away from actually people liking me in the first place. You know? So I've come to this like little balance, this little space where really it's like I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I will speak from a place where I feel is like personal to me. And the more that I come from that place, anyone can say whatever they want. And the reality is that reality is malleable. So their perception is so funny. It's like I will say some things on a YouTube video, and then I'll get comments, and people, they will say things that I didn't even say in that video. And I'm just like, well, your perception is allowing you to see this thing that I didn't even say in the first place. So that's the whole thing with like reality as well. It's like it's malleable. So whenever I even like create content on Twitter or create content on YouTube, I'm realizing that people will automatically place their own perceptions on like what that message actually means. And as long as I know what the message means to me, then that's the only thing that matters. Anything else that kind of like comes along with that is just like a bonus, or it won't matter in the first place. Yeah.
Did you feel any fears or insecurities pop up as you made that transition from written form content to actually putting your face out there?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And a big amount of that insecurity came back from that wanting to be liked and wanting people to like me. And then you're just like, well, fuck it. Like, who cares? You know? But you have to get to a place. And I do think it's like this idea of like exposure therapy as well, where the more that you do it, the more you realize that it doesn't really matter in the long run. And you have to do it enough times where you can get over that inherent insecurity. And to be honest, like I've been kind of being an amateur on YouTube since like the 2010s. So my YouTube channel, even though it's getting traction right now, like I've been making videos since like 2008, 2010. And I've been at it, but only doing it like sporadically. It's only this year where I've decided to become a pro at it. And I've decided to create on a cadence, to script out my stuff, to look at each video and to look at how I can improve each and every video, and to really treat it like a professional, just like I did when I first got into like, you know, Twitter and social media. And then the more that I approach it from that aspect of things, the more I realize that it's almost like my own like my own like subjective idea of success is already guaranteed. Versus like if I just like do that and I keep on like trying to improve it, all these like external measures of success are going to happen probably, but at least like I'm doing what I feel is like right for what I feel that video needs at like that particular amount of time. And I'm pretty sure like a year from now, I'll look back on my videos and be like, oh shit, and like cringe at all that stuff. But for now, I feel like, you know, what I'm doing and how I'm doing it is sort of right now. Yeah.
It's well said. I love what you said earlier about the concept of your reality being malleable. I think that's such a powerful statement.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to talk to you now and learn more about your story, because I think there are some people that could see you. You're 43, right?
44.
44,
Yeah.
incredibly successful business owner. You work with a ton of clients, have a huge brand. It's almost like there's probably almost this air of like, how relatable is this guy? Was he always perfect? And then when I started to learn more about like kind of your origin story and where you were in your 20s, and seems like you kind of just looked in the mirror and didn't like what you saw and decided to take drastic action. I think that's just such an encouraging thing of like, you're never too late to start. And you imagine this version of yourself now and all the people you've helped, that could have literally not existed had you not done those difficult things in your 20s to turn your life around. So maybe we could tell the audience that story, because it's so powerful.
For sure. Like, if I didn't do what I did back in my 20s, I would probably either be working a dead-end corporate job that I hate, or be a waiter, or most likely be out in the street, because at that time I was doing some drugs in a very addictive manner back then. So back in my teens and 20s, I was pretty directionless, and my parents would always like tell me, which wasn't really cool, but they always affirmed to me, like, out of every one of our kids, like, we're worried about you, right?
Yeah.
My mom, I remember, because I used to work we used to own this like printing shop. She would sit me down at her table. She had this like big conference table. She'd sit me down at the table. She would get this message for like one of my teachers about something that I did or something I wasn't doing. I was like a straight D student, and she would be like, Dan, like, what is going on? Why are you doing this? And I'd be like, I don't know. Like, as a kid, it's like, what are you supposed to say? And she was always telling me, it's like, you know, I know that whatever you put your mind to, you can achieve. I just don't understand why you're doing all this stuff. And I feel like I went through like a few transformations, and I'm still going through them right now. So my first one was, it was at a point where I dropped out of high school, and then I went to, at that time I was binge drinking on the weekends, eating bags of potato chips on the couch to myself while playing video games, completely just like, what am I doing with my life? But it's like you're stuck in this zone. And maybe back then it was depression. Like, who knows what it was? Because we didn't label these things back then. And it was at this point where, I was smoking cigarettes. Like, I was just doing all sorts of stuff that were just like the complete opposite of who I am today. And my friend asked me, because I used to play basketball, I was like, hey, Dan, you want to go like play basketball? And I was like, yeah, cool. I'm like not doing anything. I end up going to the run, and then I'm just like heaving and puffing, and my throat's just like burning because of all the cigarette smoke that's coming up. I remember one time, this during the game, like a fast break happens, and then fast break happens. I'm running as fast as possible, and then I feel like this like jiggle in my chest, and I'm just like, oh, like what is this? And then at the time, I'm like, oh man, do I have like breast cancer or something like that? Oh God, like, oh. So I remember I excused myself, and then I go straight home. I go to my bathroom, and I take off my shirt, and I'm just like, shit. And then I realized like I had man boobs, and I just looked at my body, because even at that time I was so embarrassed in my body. I was just like, it was at that time I was like so shamed, I was so dissatisfied, and then I looked at myself in the mirror, like hard look. I was like, never again. I'm never gonna feel this way again. I'm gonna do everything in my power, and I don't care like what happens. It was like this sense of determination that I'm going to change this no matter what. So I end up I end up going into basketball, getting more active, quitting smoking, and then my dad ends up kind of like giving me a pass to the gym, a 1 month pass to the gym, and I was just like, cool, like what's the worst that can happen? And I ended up going to the gym, and I was like, the worst thing that can happen is that I see some pretty girls and I get injured or something like that. Best thing is that can happen is I actually get in shape. And I ended up, because I had nothing going for my life, I just went every single day. And my only thing, and this is actually just like a big lesson, it's like whenever you're starting off with like, even just like wanting to get in shape, it's like the only habit that you really want to start is just showing up. So my whole thing was just like, show up to the gym, be there every single day. Who cares what happens? Try out all the machines. Don't even get a trainer. Don't even do it. And after like 2 weeks of going to that gym, I remember this because it's such a vivid memory. It's vivid in my memory. I remember going to the change room, and then I was putting on my pants, putting on my belt, and my belt went in like 2 notches. And I was like, this ain't right. Like, this is not supposed to happen. And that was kind of like my first time where I was like, oh shoot, like this stuff is actually pretty cool. Like weight training is kind of cool. Like this gave me results, and I actually kind of like what I'm doing. So that was like my first kind of like foray into this whole like fitness field. And then I was like pretty obsessed about fitness after that. I was obsessed about fat loss. I just didn't know at that time I was like working this job, and I just didn't know like what is it that I really wanted to do, because I was like, okay, I'm into like fitness. Now what? And then something happened in my life, which I consider to be probably like the best or the worst and also the best thing that happened. So we're in this family room with me, and I have my 3 siblings, my sister and 2 brothers. We're in the family room, and we get this call, and the call is from my dad. And our dad's like, you guys gotta come, because we were in Toronto, or Stouffville. There's like this subset of Toronto. He was like, you gotta come to Niagara right now. Something's not right with your mom. And then when you get that call, you're just like, what the, like, you don't even, there's so many thoughts that go on your mind. So we end up going there, and then we end up, they have to operate on her because there's something happening with her stomach. And while they're operating on her, they end up leaving an infection in her. This causes her to have a heart attack. Now she has to get on dialysis treatment. And they can't do it there. They have to go to this place called Hamilton, where the hospital is a lot more robust. They have that treatment. So for the next 6 months, she's in the ICU. We're going back and forth, because Hamilton is like an hour and a half away from where we live. We're going back and forth. And then, you know what? We do that for 6 months, and we actually think that she's going to make it. You know, like we get the word from the doctor. She's doing well. We put her in the next level down from ICU. And then we're like, okay, cool. I remember that day. Fuck. I remember just seeing my mom, and I look at her in the eyes, and then I say bye to her. And she couldn't even talk because she had this like tube in her throat. I remember her face. And then I leave the hospital. And then the next day, they let us know that overnight she got pneumonia. And now she's on life support. There's like this 0.001 chance that she's not going to be a vegetable. And we have to, as a family, make a choice. Do we keep her on, or do we deal with the fact that we're not going to have this? We're going to have mom, but she's just not going to be there. And then as a family, we decide that we don't want her to live life that way. And then mom passes away. And during that time, I didn't know what like depression was, but that was probably as close to depression I ever went through. I cried every single day of my life. Every single day. Every single day of that time. And this was actually during a time where I was just like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what the hell? And then I remember there was like this voice that came into my brain, that came into my mind. I've never heard it before. And mind you, during that time, while we were going through this whole hospital ordeal, I was spending so much time in like the hospital church. And I was just praying to God because I was like, please, God, like, please bring my mom back. And then while I'm going through this like depression, there's a voice that comes into my mind. It's like, Dan, you can either let this burn you up, or you can use this emotion as fuel. And I was like incredulous at this voice. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, my mom just died. What do you mean? And then it just like asked me the same question. And it kept on asking me this question like day after day until I answered the question. And my answer was like, and what I learned from that particular event was that emotion is energy. And then I was like, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use this to fuel like my life. And she passed when she was like in her mid-50s. And I was like, I was like 24 at the time. I was like, 30 more years? Like, if that's the case, like, shit, I better be doing something that I like. I better be doing something I'm passionate about. So it was at that time I ended up quitting my job that I hated. I was like, screw this. I'm not gonna continue on with you guys anymore. And I decided to go into fitness, which at the time, mind you, this is 20 years ago. This is before Instagram. This is before social media. When people thought about personal trainers, they saw it as like this side job, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't see it as like what it is right now. They saw it as like, even when I told like my friends and my family, they're like, what are you doing, Dan? Right? Because it was known as like this thing that you do as like a side hustle that makes you extra money, not something that you do as a career. But I was just like, no, if there's anything that I want, it's number one, I want to help people. That's number one. Number two, I want to do something I'm actually interested in. So that's going to be fitness. And then from there, I never looked back at that point. I took the ball and I ran with it. And that was kind of like this, like, that's why I call it like the worst, best thing that ever happened to me. It's like, would I trade it to have like my mom here again? Absolutely. I actually would. But if she's not going to be here, then I need to use that energy for something. And that's what I put it towards. I put it towards me and towards this mission that I'm on right now. Yeah.
It's such a powerful story. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I feel like one of the things that I take away from that is like how a lot of times in life, it takes some of these moments that knock us off our feet in order to create the change and true appreciation for time and actually develop a understanding of time that's based in reality. And that is that we only have so much time here,
Yeah.
and to really make the most of it. I'm curious if there's anything that you could say to, the version of yourself, 30, 20 years ago, who maybe like wasn't thinking about time in the same way, that would be impactful, because it is a tragic and hard experience. But I think if people can hear the right words, it's like you can create this change without having to go through stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, number one is you don't have to wait till you're at rock bottom to make a decision about your life. I think a lot of people, they wait until they're at their wits' end, until like the situation is like at the worst, when they're like, all right, that's it. I'm done. I'm making a decision. I'm going to move this other way. It's like you don't have to wait till rock bottom to make a decision that is like beneficial for your life. The other one I would say is also, it sounds weird, but it's like death is a feature instead of a bug in life. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times people are scared of death. And that's what I was, because I was like scared of like dying. And for what reason, I don't know. Probably because I thought I liked life at that time, but dying just seemed scary to me. But if you use it as this way to kind of like propel you, as a way to motivate you, to remind yourself that you don't have that much time, that it doesn't matter if you're 20, 30, 40, 50s. It doesn't matter. Like it can actually get taken away from you. I know people who dropped in their like 30s. I know people who dropped in their 40s. And the thing is that like life is not this thing that's like promised to us. So I like to use death as this like thing that's in the back of my mind that motivates me to work as hard as possible, but also not just to work as hard as possible, to bring balance to my life. Because like work is like one part of my life. The other part of my life is health, it's family, it's my friends, and it's all just to say to balance all these things together. I'm not trying to be like the most successful person in the world or anything like that. Like I don't care about that stuff, but I do care about the time that I spend with my family, the time I spend with my daughters, the time I spend with my wife, the work that I'm doing. Do I care about it? Am I doing as much as I think that I can be doing? Am I putting enough effort? Am I proud of the effort that I'm putting in? And then those are the things that death kind of enhances. Those are the things that death optimizes. As opposed to being scared of death, you should actually use death as this way to motivate yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing the story about your mom when you were a kid, when you were getting D's, and she was like, what is going on with you? And then I think I remember it was maybe your About Me page on your website. I think one of the things you referenced about your mom is it seemed like she really believed that you had like all this potential sitting inside of you. And that's probably why she was saying that to you, because she knew you were capable of so much more. And it's interesting how like, in a strange way, it's almost like her last gift to you as a mom was like making you realize that you had, there was just this version of Dan that could exist if you applied yourself. And you think about where you are 20 years later, I'm sure that like makes you incredibly proud of yourself too.
I am so lucky to have had someone like her who was able to see something that I could not see in myself. Because like when she said things like, anything you put your mind to, you can achieve. I'm just like, what are you talking about, lady? And then these lessons don't necessarily seep down until, shit hits the fan. And I believe that her belief in me, which was greater than the belief that I had in myself, was this catalyst to me thinking that, hey, guess what? Like, you really can put your heart and mind into anything and kind of create the reality that you want. And we were talking about like this whole idea of like reality is like malleable. I really do feel that way. Like, I really do. And call it like, call it like a connection to something or whatever you think about. But I do believe that when you kind of like lead from a place that is inherent, as true to like what your heart is speaking, then, and you let go of any kind of like outcome, you do what you think is like right for yourself and you put one foot in front of the other, I believe really good things happen as a result.
Yeah.
And you just kind of like wake up and you're like, oh shit, here I am. And the funny thing is that when it happens and when you kind of like get these things that you've seen like in your vision before you even seen it, what happens as a result is like you don't have this like celebratory thing. It was like, oh yeah, we just like hit it. It actually is this thing where it's like, yeah, this was the way it was like meant to be. Now, what's like the next, what's the next rung in this vision that we're going to create? And it stems from having a mom who believed in me. It stems from having someone who would always affirm these things into my brain until I started affirming them to myself. And I'm so thankful to my mom to this day. And I love her, man. Like she was like the most important person in my life. And I'm so grateful that I had someone like her in my life. Yeah.
It's beautifully said. I loved when before we hit record, Harry was saying how he was having some similar reflections of like, living across the country from his parents and me as well. My parents are in New Jersey, Harry's are in Virginia, and you were very quickly like, do you call her every week? Do you check in with her?
Yeah.
And it's funny because we've both been having these realizations the last year, especially as the brand has been growing. There's always this need of like, oh, I have to connect with this person or get that person on the show or get on this investor's radar. And we like picked our heads up one day and we were like, this one person would mean nothing to you if they didn't invest in your company versus like, when's the last time you called your mom? Yeah. Just the woman that's believing in you more than anyone who will like listen to every podcast or read your tweets and give you feedback. Like, I don't know. I've just been thinking, I don't know. Maybe as I'm getting older, I've just been thinking more about that. Like instead of just always striving for this new connection, like, dude, your mom's she's going to believe in you more than anyone ever will.
Yeah. And it's so funny because people will be more likely to message someone that they admire on social media than send a text message to their own freaking parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just like it's so backwards. And I think what you guys are doing and what I'm trying to do is I would like to create from a place where I am the magnet for things rather than me like seeking out and reaching out, even though like part of like, remember I was saying about like sending voice notes to 5 people that follow me. I also send like messages to people that I admire and people that, just really inspire me. And just doing like stuff like that. It's just, I would want to be the magnet for really good things rather than trying to be the person that opts to like seek them out. And what that means to me is like, okay, number one, create things that you're really proud of. So number one, it's not like external based, it's like internal based. And then eventually it's like, if you do create really good work and you kind of keep on building upon this work that you just try to keep on improving upon, where not many people are trying to do that, eventually you're going to create this kind of like attraction field where people kind of like come into your space and people want to talk to you, people want to know you, and people want to do business with you. So I do think it's like more so like be the person that can attract what you want rather than kind of like, oh, I got to like network with this, I got to network with that. Maybe it's because like I'm 44 because I did that stuff when I was in my 20s and 30s. Now I'm kind of like, I don't care about getting into like certain circles. I remember I was talking to my friend Nicholas about this, where it's just like, I really just want to talk with people that I jive with now. And if that means like there's someone that I admire, cool. But if that means they're a person who has really good values and someone that I like connect with on all sorts of different levels, cool. And that's where I'm like optimizing my life for. And eventually, like with the work that I'm putting out there and the amount of effort that I'm putting out there into my work, I think that's going to attract really good people. And I think when you come from it with like that mindset, or if I come from it with that mindset, I think I will attract the right people into my life. There is something to be said about like over networking and trying to like do everything to like, be in these circles and like all this kind of stuff. When really you should just like be the person that kind of attracts these people in the first place. Yeah.
Having gotten more into the gospel the last year and started to study the life of Jesus, one of the things that I've noticed is the law of attraction in his life. And where I think that stems from is just the truth, where, he would always tell the truth, whether it's a loving truth of encouragement or a loving truth of saying, someone's doing something wrong. And I think both draw people in, where I know there's moments in my life where a friend has given me advice or said that I'm off base on something, and it actually drew me closer to them because I respected the fact that they were able to speak some truth into my life. And I think there's something to what you're saying about just the law of attraction in general, where perceptively we're always trying to chase different things, but when you're following what's true to your nature, there really is something magnetic about that. And there's something undeniable about people who do that, because everyone knows people who are walking with a certain level of authority in their life. It's like, I want to be around that guy.
Yeah. It's like, know what the outcome is, but then also the counterintuitive thing is like to let go of said outcome and to put one foot in front of the other, and to almost like not give it this like idea of excess importance. And when we speak of truth, it's like when we hear people speak from authentic places, we respect those people. When they are talking from a place where we share similar values. So I'll use an example. I remember I was at this like business, not business, but I was like at this dinner. I was with my friends, with my community, and there's like this new guy that I met down there. And he had known like the stuff that I put out on like X and all this other places. And then I didn't ask for any like advice, but he started giving me advice on like, oh yeah, you should like, like monetize this and monetize that, and like you should do this with your audience and do that with your audience and like all this kind of stuff. And then this is what I mean by like shared values. It's like, well, I mean, like, yes, if I was optimizing for monetization and money, yes, then obviously like I'd be like, yeah, great. But that's not like what I'm trying to optimize for. He's speaking from his truth, which is like based on external, like how to make more money. For my truth, I'm like, how can I make stuff that I'm like really proud of? How can I be really, really jazzed about this thing that I'm about to create? And it was just so funny, like with the idea of like truth, it's like when you have a truth that is in line with the values that you guys share, that's one that kind of like shifts your perspective. And you know that they're not doing it from a malicious angle either. They're doing it from a place that they're speaking from, an authentic place that actually speaks true to them. And it has nothing to do with them wanting something from you or not wanting something from you. They want to do something and they want to say something to you because they think that it's going to be the best thing for you and not for them. So yeah, like for me, it's like to be able to, and I'm still trying to get there. I'm not perfect, but to be able to speak from like an authentic place where you're just like telling the truth like 100% of the time, like I'm trying to get there. I'm still not there, but to pull yourself more towards that angle, I mean, more people are just going to trust you because you're not putting a filter on yourself based on what you think should be said.
Yeah, I'm trying to remove saying the words "you should"
Yeah.
at the start of a sentence to someone.
Yeah.
It's such a good point that you make, because when you're using the words "you should," you're speaking from this place of like what you think that other person should be doing without understanding their aims, their motivations, who they are. It's like, yeah, dude, obviously I should be running paid ads on this thing.
Yes.
But the whole purpose of what I'm doing is not just to optimize for money.
Yeah.
So I think it's such a good point.
Yeah. And that's something I'm trying to get away from as well. It's the whole shoulding over yourself. It's like, and the more that I like tell people, unless they're literally asking me for advice, like if it's a coach, it's like a coach relationship. Even if it's a coach relationship, you kind of like still get away from that whole you should thing. It's like, here's what I would recommend, as opposed to like, here's what you should do, right? Because there's one thing to tell someone, do this. There's another thing for them to come to the realization themselves, whether that be trying it out first or inviting them to be able to have that thought for themselves and to make that decision. Especially from like a coach's angle, you want to make sure that the client, even though they paid you for this service, that's like, okay, change my body, tell me what to do. You actually want them to be able to make these decisions for themselves.
Yes.
Because that's going to come from like a deeper place. And then they're going to have more autonomy over that decision. And they're actually going to have more ownership over that decision. So it's like, so yeah, again, not perfect at this, but I do think that the more you get away from that you shoulds and like all this kind of stuff, the more that we can get into this place where people are just making decisions for themselves based on like what they think is right for their life.
Yeah. That's really well said. And I hope too, you'd mentioned earlier about this concept of being a magnet as a really worthy goal. And that's something that I think we both wholeheartedly agree with. And I hope people realize that you only become the magnet from putting out a really great work product and actually being someone that's useful, right? It's so easy to like overly optimize for networking and connections. And I think one of the things Harry and I have been leaning into is like, if we just be of service and create the best product that we can, other people will be gravitated towards you for that. Like for you, right? yes, you started blowing up on Twitter a couple of years ago, but that's like 20 years of effort for you to have this blow up like in 2022 or whatever it was.
Yeah. I feel very just solid with what I say because I have that 20 years behind me. And I remember first, like just like YouTube, I was like dabbling on social media, all this kind of stuff. And the reason I was dabbling beforehand, before I got like really serious about it, was because I don't believe like my ideas were validated at that time. I was still trying them out. I was still testing things out in my gym. So once I sold the gym and once I kind of like had this 2 decades of experience of fitness under me, you kind of see like what comes and goes. You kind of see like what is like the trend and what kind of like remains true, like the Lindy of fitness, so to speak. So for me, it's like having those 2 decades were so invaluable in terms of like what I'm able to do, what I'm able to speak on right now. I'm able to speak from confidence, knowing that I have that stack of effort behind me, and that's what kind of like again, it's like those reps. Everything comes down to like reps as well. It's like those are the reps that have allowed me to be strong in the opinions that I have, and even still, like I'm also like open to changing my opinions no matter what. And yeah, it's having those 20 years are invaluable to me, and I don't know if anyone right now has that patience to do that before getting on social media. But I'm glad I was able to be born in a place where we didn't have social media, where we didn't even have like the internet back then. And I remember what it was like back then. So I have this like dichotomy of like what it was like and what it is right now. And I also have that experience, and that's what allows me to create in the way that I can create, is just having that behind me. Yeah.
Having built what you've built now and having the experience under your belt now, how do you think about risk? Like, how would you talk about risk to someone who's maybe a little bit paralyzed by it?
I got my best results by looking at risk in ratios. So a lot of people, I mean, my biggest risk that I ever took was like giving up the corporate job and going all in the fitness when I went all in fitness. I would not recommend a lot of people to really do that. If it were me, and even in like this day and age, I look at risk in terms of like, okay, well, I have this thing that's going on for me. I'm going to do this thing on the side, and I'm going to take my risks with this thing that's on the side right now. Say it's like I wouldn't call YouTube a side thing because I'm being pretty professional in terms of like the way in which I approach it. But I didn't say, okay, screw Twitter and screw all the rest of my social medias, and I'm just going to go all in on YouTube. I kept all those things going, and I was using those as a basis for what I create on YouTube. So I don't think that people should give up everything and go like all in on something. I actually do think that you should be placing side bets on these risks, and then use these side bets to inform whether or not these risks are working, but also like what can you tweak within these risks to like make the chances of succeeding a little bit more. And also something that we also have to keep in mind is that sometimes these risks that you think that you may want to take, it sometimes leads you up a ladder that you don't really want to be on in the first place. You start climbing this ladder and you're like, I don't like this. You know? and then sometimes you have the sunk cost fallacy of being on this ladder and be like, well, I just like went up like 20 steps. Now I have to like just go back down and start all over again. You have to understand that it's about, I think like risk is more about side bets rather than like going all in on things. And then once you have informed that decision, and once that decision has been made, so even with like YouTube right now, it's like we're starting to see some really good traction. I'm still not giving up any of the stuff that I'm doing on social media, but I am putting a lot more attention on YouTube because it's giving me the results that I think are really good for the long term. So more like throw the side bets in and then put effort towards the side bets. And then for me, a lot of it's like down to balance too, because I don't have a social media team. It sounds weird, but like a lot of people think that I have like this huge social media team. It's like, no, it's like all me. I create on LinkedIn, I create on Twitter. I take everything I do on LinkedIn, put it over to Instagram, and I create all of my YouTube stuff. I have an editor for that, mind you. But it's to create this balance where I'm creating for these platforms and doing it in a way where I can like batch process for these guys, batch process for these. So even tomorrow's my YouTube day, scripting, creating the video, doing all the shots and edit and sending it to my editor. And then after that on Thursdays, I have my editor sends me back a video that I did last week to check it out, to make any changes that I need to make. I have like Monday or Tuesdays that are just like all about like just creating for like Twitter, creating for like LinkedIn. And now it's like to really schedule things out to like batch process and to make sure that I'm putting in the time for everything to make sure that all the wheels are still turning in a sense. But yeah, like if I were anyone like just starting off and they're like had this 9 to 5 job and like, oh, like, should I go all in on this business? Like, no, you shouldn't. Like, see if you can make $1 off of it while you're at this job. And then if you can, that informs you that you can make more money. And then I like this thing where it's like your challenge is to see whether or not your monthly income from that side hustle can match the monthly income from your main, right? I love to do that with each and every one of the projects that I do. And then once that happens, or if it happens, you know, if you're so lucky, then you're like, okay, well, this gives me a chance to say whether or not I want to keep this thing, if it serves me or not, right? And at least you have optionality rather than saying I need to go all in on this. Yeah.
It's such a good answer. And you hear so many different opinions about this because especially in Austin where it's such a creator hub, there's definitely this theme of like, F your 9 to 5 job, like jump ship as quickly as possible. And I can't imagine doing that without placing those bets. And I think you need to make the time to like have that solitude and understand what your own risk profile is. Like there's someone there, the founder of Ice Barrel, Wyatt Ewing, he came on the podcast. He said, I was working this sales job. I came up with the idea of an ice barrel and I literally put in my 2 weeks notice and just started this thing without even having a prototype ready to go. So like balls of steel, kudos to him. It's an incredible company. And then there's another guy that we've had on, this guy, Michael Coomer, who's this huge blogger out of Atlanta, nutrition blogger. And he waited until he was making 3 times the amount of money from his blog than his corporate job before he quit. So 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. What I did when Harry and I were growing Meat Mafia is I actually found gratitude in my 9 to 5, even though I didn't like it. I was like, you have this job that's paying you really well. That gives you the flexibility to like write content, learn, start to scale a following. And then once we made our first few clients from the agency business, I was like, all right, I'm not fully supplementing, but I've saved up enough and I feel confident around our trajectory that I can then quit my job to go all in. But I think we got to have to throw out that notion of like F the 9 to 5. I think you need to find gratitude and place those side bets like you're talking about and figure out that one side bet of what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, the whole F the 9 to 5, it's like, what happens when you have employees? Right? Like,
Totally.
there is a time and place for everything. And then there also is like a type of person that is positioned and like set for a specific thing. I don't think that everyone's meant to be an entrepreneur, nor do I think everyone's meant to be working a 9 to 5 either. I love the point that you made about gratitude because a lot of times it's like we think about the things that we don't have more so than the things that we actually do. And we're living in this like in this place. I remember you guys probably saw this on like Twitter where this guy showed his life on Twitter or he didn't. It was like him going through his 9 to 5. Did you guys see this video?
I saw it. Yeah.
And then everyone was just bagging on this guy, right? But the reality is that if you showed that video to someone in the 1960s or 70s, they would look at that and be like, that's an incredible life. I want that.
Right.
You know?
Totally.
Perspective means everything. And a lot of times like we have this like hedonic adaptation towards like our lives. And we are living, not many people would agree with this, but we are living pretty comfortable lives right now. Like we're living really good lives. And there are some people that are struggling. Mind you, there are some people that are struggling out there. But we have to understand, like, we do have, like, the creature comforts that a lot of people had, you know, way back then. So this whole, like, idea of, like, F the 9 to 5 and whatever, a lot of it's coming from who that person is and what they, like, you know, think. But also, it's like, I feel bad for that person who says that because if you are an entrepreneur and then you do want to have employees, like, what is the message of, like, F the 9 to 5 going to do for your employees?
Yeah.
Totally.
Right? What if they like a 9 to 5? You know, like then you know it kind of creates this like dissonance a little bit. So I do believe that there's like certain people suited for some things and suited for other things. I don't believe everyone's like supposed to be like this, you know, world-beating like entrepreneur. And you know, going back to kind of like side bets and everything like that, it's like, hey, guess what? If you were working 9 to 5 and you do have like a stable income, you know, suffice it to say, I said like I hated my job back then, but I should have been very, you know, just thankful that I had a job in the first place.
Yeah,
right.
That I was able to make that jump, right? And it is true. It's like be thankful for what you have before like thinking about the things that you don't have. Yeah.
the hedonic adaptation reminds me of what we were talking about before the podcast, which was like, we're talking about our grandparents, and you had mentioned like your grandfather coming over from Ireland, taking the risk to get on a boat to come to the US to just, with nothing, potentially like start a new life. And I think about someone like that perspective versus us taking a risk on, doing something. I'm like, okay, this isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah. Let's put things
This
into
is
perspective.
much smaller.
Yeah. Is it, like we'll call it what it is. It's like, your grandfather was an immigrant, right? My dad and even me, I'm an immigrant to this to North America, and there is something to be said about having the perspective of knowing like where you came from, and it gets so easy to like get used to the type of lifestyle that you have, that you're always looking at, like especially with social media, you're always looking at like what other people have, and then that kind of like creates this like air of like wanting what like other people have, when the reality is that guess what, if you have like a healthy body, you have a roof over your head, you have family members that love you, you have food on the table, you have clean drinking water, it's like you're crushing it. Like you are literally crushing life right now. Anything above that is like, it's pretty bonus. And I think like what a lot of people are missing right now is also like just this whole, what is life like outside of work, or what am I doing with my life that is going to mean something? And I think that's like where we're at this very moment. But we also have to like put things into perspective. It's like, I think I forgot who I heard this from. They're like, my parents were like thinking about survival. They're thinking about surviving. They came here with not that much money in their pockets. They grew up, I saw the trajectory of like being from poor to going to like upper middle class in Canada. We were living in like our family friend's basement. And that shit is going to stick with me for the rest of my life. And that gives me perspective. So, there are some times where you kind of like want these things, and there's always like these levels that you're always like jumping towards. And it's always so easy to kind of like just be too kind of inundated with what you want, rather than kind of like always like seeing everything that's like already working and being more grateful for all that stuff.
What are some of your proudest wins?
Being a good dad, being a really good husband. Those are probably the top two. Because when you become a dad, it's just like, I mean, that's pretty much like saying, are you serious about this life or what? Yeah, for me to be able to like spend the time and to make the time and to be present with my daughters, and to strive to be like a really good husband, I would say like those are still things that I'm trying to do, and those are things that I'm proud of. The aspect of taking myself from completely, I would say like rock bottom to nothing, to step by step bringing myself to like where I am right now, where I'm able to influence millions of people throughout the world. I mean, that's pretty cool. If I told the 20-year-old, my 20-year-old self, that's what would be happening, I'd be like, it still seems surreal to this day. And the last thing is like, I'm proud of kind of like this place where I'm at, where I'm really creating from this place of not necessarily trying to like play to the crowd, but trying to play to what's like speaking inside of me. And I really hope, and I cross my fingers, and I just have to be like, I have to keep myself awake to just making sure that I stay on that track, because a lot of times you can get very kind of like addicted to the results and to the outcomes that are being created. When in reality, it's like you have like zero control over all of these things. And I like to say this, it's like, I went from this place where it's like, oh yeah, I tried to like control my weight. I tried to control how much money I make. I tried to control what people thought of me. And I tried to control like all these things that are like outside of me. But now it's like, guess what? You have zero control over those things. What you do have control over is like the foods that you put into your mouth, the exercise that you do, the information that you consume, and the time that you take to do the things that you love. And those are the things that you should be focusing on. And the more that you focus on those things, the more that will give you more fulfillment, and it'll kind of like get you away from the anxiety of always like stressing over outcomes. And I'm glad I brought myself to that place right now. And I hope, and I pray to keep myself at this place.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like there's very few things that we have control over, but the things that we do have control over are so impactful.
Yeah.
How long have you been with your wife for?
Since 2016, 2015 or so. So
Awesome.
yeah, that's 9 years or so. Like
Yeah.
we're gonna be on 10 years almost.
So being with your wife for about a decade, and you're saying your proudest wins are being a great husband and a great dad. How do you feel about this whole like manosphere red pill culture of preaching monk mode and success and finding a partner or mutually exclusive? Because we have our opinions on that, and I'd love to get your perspective on it.
A number of things. So I used to be really steeped into before I met my wife. I used to be really steeped into red pill culture, and it brought me to this place where I looked at women as like an enemy rather than as someone that is more of like a partner in his life. And I got to this place where, especially like after I met my wife, where I was like, I was like still steeped in that culture a little bit. She showed me that there's like a lot of like what they talk about is like so transactional, and a lot of like what they talk about is based off of like, you know, quote unquote like evolutionary biology and like all this kind of stuff. There is something to be said about things that can't be seen, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
And when I found my wife, there was something that spoke inside of me that was just like, this is the fucking girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I first met her, I was like, this girl. And I don't know what it was. It was not based on any kind of like scientific fact or anything like that. And I had been dating a lot of, you know, people back before that. But there was just something that cannot be said about like understanding like when you meet the person that you want to be spending your time with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to like, you know, I think like a lot of times, especially like with a lot of like people who are steeped in that culture, it is like this idea of like sunk cost fallacy where you've built your brand around this thing. So obviously like you have to make sure that everything that you say is now in kind of like support of this thing that you need others to believe. And that's fine. But I believe that men and women are kind of like more complex than they are simple. And I do believe that roles, especially the way that we're evolving right now, especially the way that men are evolving, and especially the way that women are evolving at this point, it kind of like evolves kind of like our own biological needs. And when I think about it, it's like, even for myself, you know, red pill culture is like, don't think about your emotions or drive them down or do push-ups or something like that, like just to get rid of them. My whole thing is like, no, like the more that you actually push down your emotions, the more they're going to come back just stronger. So there has to be this like, especially for guys who have this thing where it's like, I shouldn't feel emotion, but guys are actually probably as emotional, if not more emotional than women. So we have to like understand how to manage these emotions, how to sit with them, and how to deal with them. And I do a lot of things like journaling and just trying to be as like aware as possible of like what's going on inside of me and what my beliefs are coming from. So for me, it's like, I think red pill culture is not necessarily something that I subscribe to, if that makes any sense. I do believe that life is a little bit more colorful, if that makes any sense. In terms of like, I'll say the monk mode thing. I do believe that, in a sense, there is something to be said about going all in and removing distraction for 6 months to 8 months, and just like going all in on goals. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
So, and I am biased to this, mind you. I have a monk mode video, and and it has brought amazing benefits to my life. I do believe in also the idea where you go to your extremes in order to find your balance, right? So with something like monk mode, I do believe that a lot of the things that we do, especially like in our idle time, they're distracting us from ourselves. So what if we put that time into like understanding ourselves, our health, our goals, and into things that, you know, fulfill us and like matter most to us. And once you're done that particular mode, what happens as a result is you have a better relationship because you've zoomed out from the things that have distracted you, and you have more of a perspective on what they mean in your life. And I actually spent a full year. So I meant to spend like 7 days away from like alcohol. And then I spent a full year. It turned into like a full year away from alcohol. And I ended up looking back at that time and I was just like, oh, cool. Like, I don't really like drinking alcohol at all. But does that mean that maybe once every like 6 to 8 months, I'm not going to partake in a drink with someone that I love? No, I'll take the debt for that day and I'll do it, you know? But I understand like what place it has in my life as opposed to what it was before, which was like this crutch that I was using to like live life. So I do believe like there is benefit to things like monk mode. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
What's one thing you want to leave for your kids, whether it's a message or legacy? How do you think about that?
Hopefully just like a better world in my own way, shape or form, in the way that I can do with my own little effort. That's probably the thing I want to leave with them. A good example is the other thing is, you know, when I'm with them, how present am I with them? Do I take care of my health because I want them to take care of their health? Am I doing something that I believe in? Because eventually, like, it doesn't matter what they choose. I just hope they believe in whatever they're doing. And having a really good relationship with my wife and loving her in front of my children, seeing that relationship as like its own organism and seeing it as like this plant that you're just constantly like watering and you're doing it intentionally because it matters to you, but also because it's going to be a reflection on like what they see a good relationship to look like. So I would say it's those things most likely. Pretty much controlling what I can control, which is like my own effort and what I put out there into the world. Yeah.
I love that. I think people are going to be really surprised that this is the first podcast that you've ever done, hearing how well-spoken you are and how good and authentic you are at telling stories. But I mean, dude, we feel honored to be able to host you on the first podcast that you've been on because, you know, whether you realize it or not, when Harry and I were starting our journey 2 years ago, you were one of those big accounts that we really looked to and saw the traction that you were having and how authentic you were and how good the content was. And you really inspired us a lot from afar. And that's been probably our favorite part of this whole journey is, you know, getting to actually meet and build relationships with people that inspired us personally. And I think getting to learn more about your story, I can't wait to hear how this impacts other people. And dude, you're just doing amazing work. And thank you so much for everything that you do. And dude, thanks for joining us on the pod today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And you guys are doing a service right now. I hope you realize that. I hope you realize that you're getting people healthier. I hope you realize that you're changing their lives through the work that you're doing. And I'm really excited to see what the future holds for you guys. And thanks for having me on here. I really appreciate it. This was awesome.
Yeah,
dude.
Yeah.
This is epic. Like, incredibly rich conversation.
Thanks.
And we went all over the place, but I think it was incredibly impactful and our audience is going to love it. So
Thanks,
yeah,
man.
we just appreciate you, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
Sweet.
Dude.
So good, man.
Great job.
That was great.
Yeah, 100%.